Thanks for joining me this afternoon. So I thought I'd mix up some stenciling and some stamping and some die cutting for you today. I don't do much die cutting. There's an awful lot of people in the design team group that make some fabulous die cut cards. But I thought I'd showcase this stamp set for you today because it's got so many uses. And I also received the new jar and bottle stencils in the post this week as well, so they just made a really perfect combination. So this card today is probably more technique driven as opposed to sort of complicated. I just wanted to show you a few techniques just to show you how I get the effects using my stamps and my stencils together, because if you look at this card, the only sort of additions to the card, or the 3D elements, are from the die cuts. The jar itself is completely flat. As you can see as I'm running my fingers over it there, that this is all created the tartan blanket effect in the background, and the jar itself are all directly onto the background of the card, and I've just used stencils and inks and the stamps to achieve that. So it's really that I wanted to show you today. And then of course we'll add the ever so pretty vines die cuts on top of that. It's from the one of the newest sets, the Through the Grapevine dies from Lisa there, that came to us in this brilliant brand new packaging. I'll just show you the dies while I've got this here. They come all in one piece. I've actually sat and snipped them and put them onto a magnetic sheet, just so as I know that I won't lose them, because that's something I do a lot of. I tend to misplace, particularly some of these smaller dies, I misplace them under bits of card and the mess I usually create on my desk. So you can see that we've got plenty of storage in these fabulous new envelopes. So even if you do, and you sort of perhaps sit in batch die cut a load of things, and you end up die cutting more than you're actually using, then this is a fabulous envelope to actually keep all the extra spares in, because you know we can't throw anything away, can we? We can come back and use them later. So we'll get going and say the first thing we need to do is actually create the blanket, the tartan blanket effect in the background with the stenciled jar on the top. So I'm using a piece of plain, super smooth plain cardstock here, and I shall bring in the checkered cloth background stamp. Now it's an A6 stamp, it's a very big stamp. As you can see here, this is the stamp itself. It's got so many different uses. And so I should be using this as like a picnic blanket background today. I've also brought in I'm using the stencil, the jar stencil. These are from the, I do believe it was in the last shows that Lisa done. Now I don't have the stamps for these jars and the bottles just yet, so this is partly where this sort of technique and card was designed from today, because I had to think of other ways to actually get the detail into the jar. But this comes as a set of two, so we have the jam jar stencil, and we also have this the shorter sort of stouter bottle as well. They come as a set of two, but I say I'll be using this jam jar today. As with all of Lisa's stencils like this, they come with the mask, and we also have the mask for the tag here. So I shall be using the mask initially, and I'll just be placing this on the background here, where I want to see the jar feature. Now it will overlap slightly because I don't want it sitting, I suppose you probably could actually, we could have that sitting fully on the piece of card here, which incidentally is about 14 centimetres square, so this will fit onto a square card blank afterwards. Actually, why not be a bit different. We'll actually sit this on top. You can see with this card here that I've also brought it down a bit lower just by having the bottom of the jar come off the bottom of the card, but I'll do it a bit different today. Okay. Now I should be using this stamp. Now you'll notice that I won't be using this on a stamping block. I tend not to with these larger background stamps because they're actually quite sturdy as they are. They come on a carrier sheet which has the design printed on it, so if you wanted to put this onto a stamping block, then just remove this and you can use that as a standard stamp. Now, oh, the birds are being noisy outside. Now, for this card I shall go with a slightly different colourway. Here I've used the pinks and therefore the berries I've adapted to be raspberries, but this time I think I'll go with a blackberry theme and use purples. Now the idea here is to have two colours that complement each other but are two different shades, so we have the darker and the lighter shade, and it's exactly the same as I've done with this card here where I used the picked raspberry and I think it might have been worn lipstick, the two inks that I used for this. My idea or my thinking behind this is that this will be sort of a jam jar, and it's quite possible that you would see, or it could even be a jar of cordial or something, but the effect I was after is you actually see the background blanket, as it were, through the jam jar, so therefore the pattern of the jam jar through here has to be lighter than the blanket on the outside, if you get my drift. So that's why I wanted to use the two different shades, and I'll show you how I created that effect. So initially I'm just going to stamp or ink up the stamp with the darker colour, so we're actually going to stamp the main bolder colour first. Actually, I've just got a piece of hair or fluff just there on the stamp. I'll just remove that because that will feature otherwise. So we'll ink this stamp up. There's two different ways you can ink. You can sort of really tap that as we go along, or you can actually stroke that on. And if you actually stroke the ink pad onto the stamps, especially one that's sort of quite solid like this, you end up with a slightly different effect. You can actually see the brush marks when you stamp this, and I think sometimes that can be a really nice effect and create just an extra bit of texture. Okay, so make sure I've got plenty of ink on there. Now I'm just going to use the outside edge, but say this backing plastic on the back of the stamp, and it's got a slight lip around the outside, so that gives me just enough of a handle to stamp that down. So make sure my mask is straight. Now I'm going to, excuse my head a second, I'm just going to come in and make sure I've lined that up. Now I'm going to hold it down with one hand at all times to make sure it doesn't slip. Now this is where this slight flexibility of not having the stamp on an acrylic block actually comes into play, because what you can do, you can actually make sure you give that an extra good press around the edge of where that mask will be. Lisa's masks and stencils are made from, I think it's a 350 micron mylar, and it makes them ever so sturdy, but it does give quite a lip, so when you're stamping around this you just need that extra bit of flexibility and just an extra little bit of care to make sure that your stamped impression just stamps itself around where that mask is. Okay, so we should just press that on all the way around, and also keeping the stamp on the page for this long also just allows that ink to transfer itself really well from the stamp to the cardstock. Right, and now we lift this off in one go. Now you can see here that it's actually taken away the mask, which is great, but it leaves you can see where the the jar needs to sit at a later date. So I shall just put that to one side. Now we've got a bit of extra space going on here, so we want to just make sure that we have like this blanket, as it were, going all the way to the edge. So I'm just going to ink up the side of the stamp again, and because of the nature of this pattern, it's really quite straightforward to pattern match and just to fill that in there. And also I've missed it along the edge there, so we shall do exactly the same along the edge of the stamp, just so as we can get that continuity. And I don't like the thought that I might have missed that a little bit. Okay, so we can just fill those in, and I think that works really well. Now I will just tidy up as I go along, because the first card I made, I got in such a pickle and I ended up with pink fingerprints all over the place. And I will clean this stamp off, because we don't want to have that bolder ink and the impression next time. Okay. Now you can see here that on the mask we still have some ink that obviously didn't transfer onto the card. What I'm going to do next, there's one of two ways of actually doing this. If you bear with me, I'll just get myself a piece of clean copy paper. Now we want to fill in this section here with also the blanket effect, but we need to do this and create a lighter look, obviously, because whatever's sitting in the jar is going to obscure what we can see behind. Now you could, if you wanted, use the ink from the mask, and I'm just going to bring in the copy paper here, and you could actually use this as a stamp. If you actually place that down, make sure that's secure, you can use that ink from the mask and use that as a stamp. And you can see it actually transfers the ink from the mask there. Oh, hopefully I haven't, my screen has frozen. Hopefully you can still hear me. I shall carry on going. Yeah, so you're not actually wasting the ink, so you're actually using it there, but that's a little bit patchy for me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in with the lighter of the inks this time, and I shall just ink this up, ink the stamp up again, and it doesn't matter how much, well, you can ink the whole of the stamp up. Now what I'm going to do, again, because we can pattern match, because of the nature of the pattern, if you just excuse my head coming in again, I'm just going to pattern match, and I'm just lightly going to stamp that lighter ink into where the mask was sitting. Yeah, sorry, excuse my head there. Luckily I went to the hairdressers this week, so you've got a nice view. Yeah, so I'm just going to stamp that lightly in there where the mask was sitting, and if I take that away, you can see, actually that's worked really well. You can see now we have a lighter impression. What that then enables me to do is to come in with my stencil, my full stencil this time, and place that over the top, and now we can start filling in like the jam of the jar, as it were. And to do that I shall go back to the darker ink that I'm using and just use the stencil in the traditional way, starting off on the mylar as I usually do, and just start filling in the inside of the stencil like so. Now that's just slipped because I wasn't holding that properly. Actually, if you bear with me, I should just turn that around. I found it easier to work it this way around. Now what we can do, we can start filling in with this dark ink. to create the dimension of the glass jar, and I think Lisa mentioned this and demonstrated this on her Create Craft shows also, that you actually apply the ink the most and probably the heaviest around the outside. Now can you see that what I'm doing there? Yes you can. And you can see by doing this what you actually blend in the inside of the stamped image also, so that will actually blend into the background. And you can see here how that's working. Now it's entirely up to you how heavy you go with the ink on the inside here. You can see while I'm doing this, you can just perhaps look at the pink one there, that the inks that I used for the pink card there actually worked even better, because the paler ink on the inside really did blend into the background and was a lot fainter. I really like how that worked. Okay, so if you bear with me. Now, as I said, because I don't have the stamps to add any specific detail just yet to these jars, I just wanted to show you who may, you know, that there may be other people in the same situation. You may only have the stencils, but there is still a whole lot you can do to actually create the detail, even though you don't have the stamps. I'm just going to clean off my mask there. Now obviously I'm going to bear in mind that this jar would have a lid on it, so I want to create sort of a contrast colour on the top here. To do that I need to create some sort of shaping, so I'm actually going to use the top of the mask here. My screen's frozen again, I'm hoping that you're still able to hear me. Okay, so I'm actually going to use the top of the mask and I'm just going to place that in position as to where the bottom of the lid would be, and I'm just going to hold that in place and come back in with my blending ink again, and let's say working with the darker on the outside and blending it in towards the centre, so we've got like a shine section in the centre. That gives us the dimension. This is actually going to be adding the shaping to where the lid will be sitting. Now I'm going to introduce another colour here, Hickory Smoke. It's going to be very faint, but this is actually hopefully going to add some like shade and just sort of darken the tone along the edge of the jar here. Very much in the same vein as Lisa did. I think she used ground espresso, which worked perfectly as well. I'm just going to use it's a Hickory Smoke. It's like a grey colour because it's actually going to blend in with the colours I'm going to use for the lid, and that just adds that tiny bit more dimension around the edges there. Okay, so now as we pull that away, you can start seeing this jar really come to life, and you can see by using the curve of the top of the mask, that's really given us a real sense of the curvature of the jar. So now we can start working on the lid. Bear with me, I might need to just rearrange this as to the best way to hold this to actually add the ink this time. Right, now we've created our purple section here. Obviously we don't want to come and encroach onto that. We need that to be a nice crisp line, so we really need the inverse or a mask to mask that off. So I've already created one. I've used this just on a practice before, and we can use this piece of card to actually mask off that. Now if you think about this, hopefully this isn't going to be too complicated. To create this shape I use the mask and flipped it, and that's what gave me that curvature there. So we need to now create an inverse to cover this side. So all I just took a piece of cardstock and I drew this curvature into the cardstock and cut it out here. So you can now see that I've created myself an extra mask that actually protects this section. So what that will enable me to do, I can mask that off underneath, I can add my stencil on top, and now we are free to start stenciling and creating the lid of the jar. I hope that makes sense to you. If there are any questions or something you need me to just clear up a bit later on, then please do message and I can take a bit more time and perhaps do some photos. Or when this goes on YouTube, obviously you can replay this back time and again until that sort of you've got the time yourself to actually sort of take that on board. So I should be using the Hickory Smoke here to add the lid. I'm just going to bring in some pumice stone as well, just to add a sort of extra dimension of colour there, just to take away some of the greyness. Okay. Now obviously the lid has like the screw section on the lid, doesn't it? So what I'm going to do to create that, and you can just see here, I'll just bring this in, my screen keeps freezing, which is a little annoying. You can just see here I've created the lines. I mean it's not perfect, but from a distance that it adds the detail that you need. To create those, all I've done is I moved my mask up and I just realigned it to the notches that are already in the stencil. And so you just remove, just push that into places to where you think that might look good to you. So everybody will be different with that. It's your perception of how you create things. And all I do, I just come back in with a bit more ink and I blend more ink just along the line of the mask there. Okay, so what we want to do at this stage now is just concentrate on blending along this line of the mask, because that will create more of a shadow, the darker shadow line. So let me just move that away. You can see that's actually worked. I'm just going to move that down again slowly just to create a shadow. So it's all about creating the contrast and sort of tricking the eye, and the use of inks is a really great way of doing that. Obviously when I get the stamps that go along with these stencils, then I can add sort of more detail that way. So hopefully you can see that we've actually created some contrast and some detail there. Without the stamps, you can just use the stencils and a bit of clever use of the inks, and you can create just as much detail. Okay, I'm pretty pleased with that. So now we can start adding our decorations with our die cuts. Now I've already die cut the pieces from the set in our green. So this is from our Through the Grapevine set here, and you can see that we have the leaves that come in sets of 3, and the wonderful detail, the embossed detail that the die sets actually give to you. I'll just show you the dies themselves. So you have the dies for the leaves here, and you can actually see the detailing of the veins of the leaves, and that is what's actually embosses into the paper and to give you the gorgeous detailing. And it's also the same for the actual berries. Now I created raspberries last time, as you can see. I'm bringing that in here with a pink card, but this time I'm using purple card to create blackberries. and you can see here that the die has got the detail there which actually embosses into the cardstock, which I think is just fabulous. And on top of that, I'm actually using a textured cardstock as well, so that gives extra detail. Now we can just start arranging our swirls here. So there's different ways of doing this, and this is entirely personal choice. And I can just stick these as I go. Don't be afraid also of cutting into your die cuts. I shall be doing that in just a second. If they don't quite fit onto your design as is, especially with these large swirls, they're designed in such a way that you can cut them and trim them and reuse them in other sections. So I think what I'll do, I want that to swirl along the bottom of the jar, just like so. But what I can then do is just snip off this swirl here, still have the glue, and I can add that to this section here. So we can make that fit. Now I can, oh, bear with me there, tangled up, there we are. Okay. And I think it's important to say that you don't actually need glue along the whole length of this. Sort of strategic points I think works really well. I can add another swirl just there. Now this is a swirl from the previous card, and I think and it's a slightly different colour, but what I think I might do, I might use that one too. And it's worth keeping all the offcuts as well. If you don't reuse them onto the card, sort of keep them as long as they're not too small, obviously, because it gets a bit silly with the amount that you can keep. But just keep them, because you can slot them into other designs that you're doing, so just like that. For me that works really, really well. Now I can start adding some of the leaves. And you can start seeing now how this really comes to life. Now, initially when you look at this stamp set, and especially with the jar, your initial thought would be going into creating a jam jar and putting the berries on the inside. I wanted to go and do something a little bit different, which is why I've left the inside of the jar sort of empty, as it were, and I wanted to create like the detail and the berries sitting around the outside, perhaps in a way that you would create your display like a country fair. It's just an alternative way of using the dies, really, isn't it? I mean, everybody has their own interpretation. So we'll add that just there, and this is where I can snip away the rest of that leaf. Bear with me. And the stem. Lay that into place like so. Let's say there's an awful lot of people who are very good at die cutting and create some wonderful layers and textures. Say stamping and inking is really my thing. So it's just a case of arranging these in the way that you is pleasing to your eye. And I think it's fabulous the way that everybody does things very differently. Okie dokie, so I can put that there. Now I shan't use this full set of leaves, so I'm just going to snip one of the leaves off of there, add a section of glue, and I'm just going to pop that over the top there, over the top of those berries. Now we can add a couple of free berries at the bottom here. Now this time of year is just perfect for blackberries, isn't it? I know I've got brambles in our garden which are actually the bane of our life all through the year when we're gardening, but we certainly do make the most of the blackberries that come out in the garden this time of year. I do like a blackberry crumble. So just add the little tops to the berries there. So although we're talking about this set being seasonal and ideal for autumn at the moment, obviously this can also be used all the year round. With raspberries you could fashion them so that they'd be strawberries, but also as grapevines also, which as we all know are perfect all year round. So as with many of Lisa's sets, excuse me, they all have so many different functions that you are not just restricted to sort of the time of the year, the season that they may perhaps be introduced to you. So I think that's enough for me now. I'll just put these to one side. Actually, I just want to bring this in very quickly. This is the piece that I actually die cut all the leaves and the swells from, and I just wanted to show that how brilliant the die is cut actually, but also if you rearrange them really well before cutting them, you can actually be really quite economical with the amount of card that you're using. If you can see here that I've hardly got any waste on that card, so I really didn't need a huge amount of green cardstock either. So I need to add the sentiment now. Now for this I've used perhaps one of my favourite sets now. It's these dies, the Framer Word dies. I've cut them out twice in a different colour just to see which would be best. So I have the green. I did wonder if that would be a nice contrast, but looking at it I might actually go with the purple now. I actually quite like that, and if you actually see here, I've actually double mounted it. I've cut it twice, so on the lighter lilac and on the purple as well, and I've set them both on top of each other and just offset them, so the darker purple is the shadow behind the lilac, and actually that sits really nicely on the top there. I really like that, so which you'll just add this along the top there. There we are. Just let that glue set a little bit. Now, and I can trim away the excess there. I always find it's better to cut larger and add to your card, and then trim down to size, as opposed to actually measuring the length that you need initially, because out of experience I find that always ends up just a little bit short, or if you perhaps then add it to your card once it's cut in a slightly the wrong position, that it's not quite the right size. Okay, so all that leaves me to do now is to mount this onto its backing colour, so we can either go with the green or the purple. I'm not quite sure. Oh, I don't know. What should I do? You know what, I might actually go with the green on this one, as I've done the sentiment in purple. I think that makes that stand out. What do you think, Dawn? Would you go with the green? I know purple is your favourite, so you perhaps go purple. but I think I might just go with the green there. There we are. Actually, so I'm really pleased with the way that's come out today. And if I shall stick that down in a second. And if I bring in the pink one there, you can see the two different flavours, that they look totally different, but I've used the same techniques on both. So I hope that's given you a few ideas on how to use your stencils today, along with your stamps. As I say, you don't have to have every single piece in Lisa's collection or to actually create a piece and actually get the most of them. What I'm probably trying to say is that if you just have the stencils, you don't necessarily need the stamps to bring the design to life. So if you give that a go, I'd love to see your makes. Post them into our Creating with Lisa Horton craft group. I shall get this video edited, and in the next few days I shall pop this onto YouTube for you as well, so it's there for your reference. So I shall love you and leave you this afternoon. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I shall be back with you again next Tuesday. Enjoy your afternoon, everyone. Thanks.